Hello and welcome once again to the Spouter-Inn. I'm Chris.
And I'm Suzanne.
And I've been reading Wuthering Heights by Emily Brontë.
And I've been rereading Laurie Colwin's collection of essays, Home Cooking.
So, listeners, please get yourself a comfy drink, pull up a seat, and join us for a conversation about these books and more here at the Spouter-Inn. All right, we like to start these conversations with a little bit of an icebreaker question, and I figure why not test the waters and potentially frustrate some of our listeners? Because, Suzanne, I want to hear about if there's any canonical book that, for whatever reason, you just don't get on with.
Oh, this is a good and an embarrassing question, right? Because you always kind of know if it's a big canonical book and you don't get along with it, it must be you and not them. I assume, right? So there are a number of these. It's hard to know where to begin. I have to confess that the book you're going to be sharing today is one that I've had that kind of feeling about. And then as a medievalist, I have an embarrassing admission. There are two major books of medieval English literature that I just find excruciating.
Beowulf?
No, Beowulf is, okay.
Okay.
And, but...
I don't have anything against Beowulf. I just haven't found a translation that's grabbed me. So I've never actually gotten my way through it for whatever reason.
That's something that would actually be really fun to talk about one day. We should do that. Yeah. So Malory's Morte d'Arthur and Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. Oh. Both of them, I'm just like, and a lot of people love Gawain, but I'm just like, I do not see it. I'm just like, oh, God, what are we doing? And I don't understand it because the kinds of things people like, the fact that there's a focus on geometrical form and symbolism and like allegory. Normally this pushes my buttons. So yeah, I don't know.
I've been to several really interesting academic papers about Sir Gawain. I haven't really tried it myself. I've just dipped into it a little bit, but
it must be me.
It might be. Who knows? It is interesting. And of course, it's perfectly fine if you don't like a book that I like or I don't like a book that you like or whatever. The world is nice and varied. One of my biggest, I don't like this book, but everybody else does, is kind of one of the biggest books, which is, books. Hamlet. I don't like Hamlet very much. I find it quite frustrating and tedious. I do like the Laurence Olivier movie of Hamlet, but I think it's a really weird take on they're seeing things in that book that I don't, but I see it in the movie. So I feel like maybe that's what people are liking. I don't know.
That's interesting. So is it the play kind of as a whole that alienates you, or is it more the central character? Is it more character based or more wide ranging?
I think it's maybe even more discourse based. People love this book for its psychological depth and such, and I'm just like, no, it's all plot contrivance. I don't know. We'd have to do a whole episode on Hamlet in order to get at the root of that, and I don't even know if that's an interesting thing to try to do, but we haven't done Hamlet yet, so that's kind of a sign that it hasn't been as much of a priority for us.
I think the only Shakespeare we ever did was The Tempest, wasn't it?
Yeah, there's definitely others I would do.
Yeah, me too. We should talk about that.
Yeah. And one of the other big books that I just did not get on with that a lot of people love is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Brontë. Yeah. I did not care for that at all. I found it really, for the most part, the first third is okay, but then it just quickly goes downhill, and I don't know, all the characters were sort of unpleasant and not in fun ways, and it just felt very tediously moralizing by the end, which or I don't know. To explain that, I suppose would get into it. But a lot of people really like it, and that's good. I'm happy for them. I don't care for that book. So.
It is a book that frustrates you. That definitely. There's like you said, there's these unlikable characters. There's this sense of you get angry, I think, at the characters. At least I remember that in my experience with Jane Eyre. And I remember being okay with that in that particular book because, the sort of mystery, of what's going on, trying to really understand what's going on with the house there. And then ultimately at the end, the kind of drama, the, big, I don't want to give spoilers, but, the big drama that's going on at the end, that's satisfying enough to get you through. But that sense of anger and frustration, I totally know what you're talking about. And it's not so totally different, for me anyway, from what we were talking about briefly with Wuthering Heights.
Yeah. But, maybe someday down the road, I'll read it and it'll hit me the right way this time, or I'll just be in exactly the right mood and it'll change.
Just read the good parts.
Sure, yeah. And it's okay. I'm not required to like everything that a bunch of people like. It's fine. It would be boring if we all liked the same thing.
It would be boring.
The remainder of the letter is for yourself alone. I want to ask you 2 questions. The first is, how did you contrive to preserve the common sympathies of human nature when you resided here? I cannot recognize any sentiment which those around share with me. The second question I have great interest in, it is this. Is Mr. Heathcliff a man? If so, is he mad? And if not, is he a devil? I shan't tell my reasons for making this inquiry, but I beseech you to explain, if you can, what I have married.
It's a great passage. It's very Frankenstein-ish, isn't it?
Yeah, there's actually a lot of about Wuthering Heights that is Frankenstein-ish. I kept thinking as I was reading it. Let me start by saying that this is my first time reading Wuthering Heights because I didn't like Jane Eyre when I read it as a kid, and so I avoided all of the Brontë sisters, which may not have been fair, but so it goes. And then I married somebody who is very into the Brontë sisters. And so this has been on my, you should probably give this a try. It would be really nice if you gave this a try kind of list for a while. And I gave in. I gave in and I gave it a try. And I had a lot of fun with it. Have you ever read Wuthering Heights?
As I was saying, it's one of those books that I tried to read at early in life and then sort of in midlife and so on, and bounced off it, just bounced off it and bounced off it and bounced off it. And then finally, for today, I thought I really have to, at least read a little bit of it. And I read a good way in, and then I just got so angry and so frustrated, and I was like, I cannot read this anymore. And ironically, the place I broke off was not too far. It was like right around where your cold open comes from, funnily enough. So I'd read that section, and then after that letter, I was like, I cannot with these people. I just cannot.
They are hateful people.
Oh my God, all of them in their own way.
Let me give a little bit of a plot summary first, and it will be light on spoilers, but I guess there are things that are spoilery. I think it's fine if you read the book knowing a few spoilers, but you know what you're getting in for. So, out on the wily, windy moors of northern England live 2 landed families, the Lintons of Thrushcross Grange and the Earnshaws of Wuthering Heights. One day, the Earnshaw father heads off to Liverpool, promising to bring back gifts for his children, but instead, he brings back a strange orphan boy that he found near death on the streets. Now, how noble of Mr. Earnshaw to take care of this young boy, who, somehow, not having a name of his own, despite being about 11 or 12, he names Heathcliff. But, despite how much Mr. Earnshaw dotes on the boy, his introduction into the family will lead to generations of sadness and traumas upon the Lintons and Earnshaws both. Or, to look at the plot another way, the year is 1801, and a certain Mr. Lockwood has decided to take his leave of London and live in the isolated moors outside of York. He is renting a property called Thrushcross Grange, and shortly after arriving there, he visits his landlord, a misanthropic man named Heathcliff, who lives in a dilapidated property called Wuthering Heights, with a few curious servants and relations. A storm forces Mr. Lockwood to spend the night at Wuthering Heights, and he has bad dreams in the night, including one where the ghost of a woman named Cathy clatters at the window, begging to be let in. When he gets back to the Grange, he asks his housekeeper, Mrs. Nellie Dean, to tell him who Heathcliff and Catherine are, and she does so. Lockwood is the narrator of the book, but most of the book is a transcription of Nellie Dean telling this story. And I think it is that moment when, after a few chapters of Nellie Dean telling her story, she breaks off. She's like, I've been talking so long. It's bedtime. I really want to go to bed. And Lockwood is like, Oh, come on.
Mm.
Just a little bit longer. just a little more. I really want to know this one more detail. And convinces her to keep going to the story. And then several chapters later, she's like, no, seriously, it's 1:30 in the morning. Let me go to bed. And he's like, oh, I guess. Okay, fine. And then Lockwood falls sick because he was out in the cold, going to Wuthering Heights, caught a cold, and spends, in the classic 19th century style, like 8 or 10 weeks just flat on his back, unable to do anything, unable to even hear more of the story. And as soon as he's healthy again, he's like, you got to tell me more about what happened. That's funny.
Mm-hmm.
Like that interaction of just what a silly person Mr. Lockwood is, and how he steps on Nellie Dean's toes and just tries to squeeze this out of her, and is just sort of unaware of what he's doing, just wandering into his landlord's house, just wandering out onto the moors, being like, doopy doopy doo, this is a weird countryside, and it's very easy to get lost here, but I'm just going to go for a wander. Like, it's very silly.
Mm-hmm.
And it's such a strange book. It's such a weird, claustrophobic little book.
Well, it's all in this one little remote location, right? Which is wild and outdoorsy, but at the same time, like you said, very claustrophobic. Like, it's like this inner world, kind of.
Yeah. There's a little town nearby named Gimmerton, which is a fun name for a town. But the closest we get is the churchyard where some of the bodies end up being buried. Like, it's incredibly claustrophobic. And also, when people do leave these two houses, they sort of fade off. Like, there's a character who goes to London for a while, and while she's there, it's like she barely exists for the purposes of the story and the people in it.
Yeah, and there's this moment right early on, right, where Mr. Earnshaw, the old guy who brings Heathcliff back, he talks about going to Liverpool, right? So you get the sense that there's a city, and like it's even a port, right? So it's like this doorway to the world, kind of. But we don't see any of that. It's just like we know it's way over there somewhere.
Yeah. We don't follow Heathcliff when he leaves and goes off into the world to make some money at one point, and comes back to get his revenge on the people who were quite mean to him. I mean, obviously, a lot of the book is about Cathy and Heathcliff and their relationship. And a lot of how this book is read, I think, by fans is about, well, I mean, I think there's a certain number of readers who are like, Cathy and Heathcliff are the ultimate couple. So romantic. They're out on the moors. They're desperately in love with each other. Their love for each other drives them insane. And, when Cathy dies young, she promises that she will still somehow stay with Heathcliff, and that's how she keeps haunting him. And it's all about all of that. Without sort of recognizing just how awful these people are.
Yeah, and also, like, one of the things the book is about, you mentioned earlier, revenge, right? Heathcliff coming back for his revenge. But it seems like there's a lot of vengefulness, like, throughout this whole book. Like, all these unpleasant people are consumed with this desire for vengeance. Or many of them, anyway.
Oh, yeah. I mean, most of the characters in the book are pretty awful. And that's usually kind of a turnoff for me. Like, I don't know, especially if that's where some of the humor is coming from. But I don't know. Somehow it worked for me this reading this time. I don't know. I don't know what it is.
I wonder if part of it is what you were talking about earlier, like the way the frame narrative works. Mr. Lockwood, the hapless and ridiculous Mr. Lockwood, and then Nellie Dean telling her story. Like, because they're not really dislikable. Like, Mr. Lockwood is ridiculous. No, he's ridiculous. And then Nellie, like, she keeps going through all these really frustrating situations. And I'm like, I'm really rooting for Nellie. I'm like, oh, God, like, people are being so annoying and bad to you.
Well, now that's an interesting topic.
Bear in mind, I only read to a certain point.
Exactly. There are a number of things about this book that are sort of open for debate. One of them being, for example, is Heathcliff Mr. Earnshaw's illegitimate child that he's bringing home, which, the book doesn't say anything one way or the other about that, but there's been a lot of headcanon from the fans, so to speak, about that situation. One of the other big questions is Nellie Dean good?
Oh, interesting. That makes it way more interesting.
Because she is not, it would seem, a fully reliable narrator. There's a very much cited article from the 50s or 60s. I should have had it at my fingertips, but basically that puts forth the idea that Nellie Dean is just as bad as Heathcliff.
How interesting.
is constantly manipulating everything, is constantly like saying one thing and doing another, and has her own agenda through a lot of it. Some of which is absolutely like in the text that she has an agenda. But Charlotte, who put out the second edition of the book and had a little preface at the beginning of it, clearly thinks that Nellie is a good Christian woman and is one of the bright rays of sun in this otherwise dark and somewhat immoral book. So it's, I don't know, like, authorial intent. I don't know. Emily didn't survive. In fact, I should probably give a little bio about that sort of thing. Because the story of the Brontë sisters feels so unlikely to me.
I know, it's almost like a drama in itself, right?
Yeah. So we've got Charlotte Brontë, who wrote Jane Eyre, Emily Brontë, who wrote Wuthering Heights, and Anne Brontë, who wrote The Tenant of Wildfell Hall. There are other books, but they were sisters. Their father, Patrick Brontë, was born in Ireland as Patrick Brontë, and he was born in sort of, tremendous amounts of poverty and illiteracy and all that stuff. But he clawed his way up, I suppose, and along the way, he decided to make his name a little more fancy, changing the Y to an E and putting the diaresis on top of it.
Very fancy.
Very fancy indeed. He ended up working as a curate in the parish of Haworth in the West Riding of Yorkshire, England. Patrick had a bit of a literary bent. He'd published a few books of poems by the time his children were born, and he collected a library that his children would have fun growing up with. And again, I'm no expert on Wuthering Heights or the Brontes, right? There are definitely people listening to this who know way more than I do. But from what I can tell, it seems like the family was both sort of isolated and very haunted by death. Their mother passed away shortly after Anne was born. Some of the children were sent off to school, but then the two eldest sisters, Maria and Elizabeth, died of tuberculosis at the school. And Charlotte and Emily were yanked back home to be raised and educated by their father and by their mother's sister. And Haworth in general was like an unhealthy and polluted town with a very high early death rate, which was compounded by an overcrowded graveyard that was like polluting the water supply, I believe.
Thick.
Yeah.
Gosh.
It's a terrible situation. The sisters and their brother Branwell ended up spending most of their time together in the home, which looked out onto the Yorkshire moors, and they made up stories and made up shared worlds, and we have a certain amount of their juvenilia. And then the three sisters ended up publishing a collection of their poems in one volume using pen names, Currer Bell, Ellis Bell, and Acton Bell, taking on male names because, sexism. A year after the poems came out in 1847, Charlotte published Jane Eyre. A month later, Emily's novel Wuthering Heights came out in a 3-volume set that also included Anne's novel Agnes Grey, all of them published under their pen names. And then a year later, Branwell died suddenly. At his funeral, Emily caught a cold, and a few months later, she also died, aged 30. Anne died a few months after that, aged 29, and Charlotte managed to last a few more years, but died in 1855, aged 38. Their father outlived all of them.
Very dark. Very dark.
Very dark. But the 7 novels that the sisters wrote are all still read and generally respected, and Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights are considered 2 of the most important, influential, and great English novels.
Yeah, they're biggies.
Like, talented families exist, but like talented families where like 2 siblings define a genre is that's just wild. That's just wild.
Yeah. And there's got to be so much to say about the kind of development of the Brontë mystique kind of, because they died young, published a certain number of novels, but there's all this sense of like unfulfilled potential, like of the possibilities, right?
Sure.
And so that creates a certain kind of aura, maybe.
Yeah. And also because Emily and Anne died first, Charlotte was somewhat in control of their legacy, just as their novels had been published. So got to write the introduction to the second edition of the book, got to sort of control some of the discourse about what their personalities were like. There are sort of limited ways about how we got information about Emily and Anne. So like this makes it very hard to say anything about like Emily's intent, right? because it's all, everything we know about her is either in the text or it's mediated through one or two other people, including Charlotte, who is significantly more proper than her sisters were, it seems.
Yeah, coming back to this idea of being proper, it feels like that's also a huge theme in Wuthering Heights. That is, what kind of behavior is appropriate? Like what, and on the one hand, you can understand that in terms of observing social norms, like not being too much, not being excessive, and there's a lot to say about that. But it could also be like, I don't know, there's a sense on which, on the one hand, both Heathcliff and Catherine's behavior is like too much. It's not proper. It's excessive. It's overflowing. But there's also an argument made that it's exactly right. That the world they're living in and the moors particularly as a kind of landscape that dictates the inner life of people, that it is in a weird kind of way appropriate. Do you have any of that sense, that sort of weird sense of violating boundaries, but also being exactly where they should be in some sense?
Absolutely. It does feel like the Moors are sort of pushing their way through Heathcliff and through Catherine. Catherine, of course, at some point as a child, Heathcliff and Catherine run off to the Lintons and are sort of peeping at them through the window, and the dogs attack, and Catherine ends up hurt, and in the 19th century fashion, spends several weeks at this other family's house, where she learns to be respectable and falls in love with the boy in the family, right? And so she gets caught between this like desire for being proper and classy and all the things that she's learned in this one location versus the kind of wildness that she sees and enjoys in Heathcliff. So like she's constantly dealing with this tension, and it's always interesting to see where she's landing in terms of like which one is the real Cathy. Can these two sides of her personality find some compromise or situation? Is the wild side just being sparked by Heathcliff, who is a devil figure? Like these are all on the table throughout that part of the novel.
Yeah, you're right about that moment being so crucial, because when they're both outside the window looking in at the respectable family, like they're together, Cathy and Heathcliff. And then she, like you said, she gets taken into the house, and that's, then they become separated and different as inside and outside, right? And that tension never goes away.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing that I think about with this is there's a chapter where Cathy and Heathcliff and the Linton boy are all having a big row. And they're all saying lots of wild things and accusing each other. And I had a moment of stopping and being like, wait a minute, how old are these people? And like, interestingly, the book is really clear about how old everybody is. It doesn't like tell you at every moment, but it absolutely has every date plotted out and drops enough hints along the way that you can do the math, and people have. And the version of the book that I was reading from had the little, family tree with all the birth and death dates of all the characters in it. And like, these characters are all teenagers. Cathy dies, spoiler, but you saw that coming. They all die. The important thing, every character basically dies young.
Well, absolutely, yeah.
Cathy dies when she's 18. And so all of these sort of big emotions are teenager emotions.
Those are the biggest emotions.
Exactly, famously. But you sort of get into the habit of thinking that, well, these people who are marrying each other and having children in these kinds of books are the age that we tend to think of people that we know marrying and having children, which is a little bit older than that. So they're acting much bigger than you'd expect, but they are teenagers. And they're also teenagers who live in this isolated world where there's only, seemingly Cathy's romance prospects are Heathcliff, this other boy, or
nothing. Yeah.
No one else exists.
And, this sense of the environment making them into these kind of wild people, you see this play out in this really interesting spot. Like, you were talking a little bit earlier about Nellie Dean, the maid and her role and how trustworthy she is. One of the most interesting things about her character, I think, is this relationship she has with the little kid. Catherine's brother, her older brother, Hindley, he goes off, mysteriously goes off to college, gets married, and has a kid. And he kind of isn't very important for the plot, as far as I know, after that. But the kid, Hareton...
He is. But
okay. Well,
there's a whole second half of the book that doesn't get included in the movie adaptations very often. But anyway, it's fine.
So Hareton, this little, so Nellie Dean talks about looking after him when he's a baby and protecting him from, getting slugged by careless and violent adults in the household. And she leaves the house and he's left behind. And then she comes back there at another point later on, like almost a year has gone by, and he doesn't recognize her. And he's like kind of feral. Like he's just like, he's a little kid, but he's like almost like an animal, right? Like hostile and aggressive and doesn't know her and everything like that. And it's almost like that what happens to that child is almost like a microcosm of something that's happening to everybody in this book, because they're in this environment that's like turning people bad, kind of. Like, in my mind, that kind of resonates a little with what you were saying about the Brontes' hometown, you know, that it was a place where full of early deaths and like corruption, kind of, in a certain sense, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's also interesting because, you know, Kathy's older brother, Hindley, is a terrible person and sort of evinces this very early on by being just awful to Heathcliff, especially once his father dies. And he gets control of the house, and suddenly Heathcliff is no longer like has any position within the house and is just subject to abuse and is like the lowest of the servants.
And hence the revenge later on, right?
Hence the revenge later on. Exactly. But there's a moment where Hindley has this kid that he's much more interested in drinking and gambling than this kid. And so he's got this baby and like he drops him off a flight of stairs.
Yeah, I chuckled.
It was a great scene. There's a really lovely Edward Gorey print that reminds me of this, where somebody's just dropping a baby from a stairway. But anyway, Heathcliff accidentally almost catches the baby. Catches the baby, thinks, "Oh, I saved a baby. That's probably good." And then is like, "Oh no, this I saved the baby of this person who I hate and want to get revenge on. It would be much more simple if I hadn't." That's funny.
Yeah, God, these people.
You know, there's several moments of this. Like, again, I'm sort of stressing the comedy thing, but I really, there's several moments where there's just this really wonderful setup and punchline. So a lot of the book is Nellie trying to convince Mr. Lockwood, our narrator, of how wonderful Kathy's daughter, Kathy, is. All the names are ridiculous in this book. I mean, some of them are normal names like Kathy, but they're deployed in weird ways, such as having two of them. So Kathy's daughter, Kathy, who we might call Kathy too, is in this terrible situation where she's stuck in Heathcliff's house. And basically, Nellie gets this idea that if Mr. Lockwood marries Kathy too, that'll help her escape, and that'll be the best situation.
Well, that's crazy.
It's crazy for a number of reasons. But, you know, she's been telling the story and talking up how wonderful and pretty and smart and vivacious and so forth she is. And when Lockwood is finally healthy enough to go visit, he's all excited. Oh, she's going to be so beautiful, and I'm going to propose, and then we'll head back to London. It'll be great. Yada, yada, yada. He shows up, and, like, the image that he's got in his head and what he sees of this, like, sullen, dour, dull woman who's like grumpily peeling potatoes or something. I forget the exact details, but it's like she is completely the opposite of what he went into that room expecting. And he then has to sort of slowly back out of the room kind of effect. Like, no, this is not actually what I'm going to be doing. Never mind. And again, comedy gold.
But nobody's ever made a, you know, comic movie of this, right? It's always like Sturm und Drang, right? It's always like...
Yeah. Have you seen any of the movies?
Oh, no. Like, I couldn't read the book, so I couldn't possibly see one of the movies.
Well, I decided to watch two of the movies that have been made of it. There's one from 1939 that I think most people agree is the one. It's got Laurence Olivier as Heathcliff and David Niven as the Linton boy that Kathy marries.
Oh, that sounds good.
Yeah, it's very good. Laurence Olivier does a fantastic job as Heathcliff, especially in scenes where, all right, so Isabella, Kathy's husband's sister, the Linton girl, ends up deciding that of all the men in town, of which there are none, Heathcliff, who shows back up very prosperous, Heathcliff is definitely her best shot of having a good partnership. And so she's like throwing herself at him, and everybody else is like, "Are you sure?" And even Heathcliff is like,
"Are you sure?
Are you sure?" And really underlines this. This is a slightly upsetting note, so skip ahead a few seconds if you don't want to hear it. But one of the ways that he does this is as they are sort of heading out to elope or something, just to make sure that she really wants to be with him, he hangs her little puppy dog from a tree. The dog is fine. Nellie Dean saves it. Isn't she a hero in the story that she's telling us about? But nevertheless, it's like, come on, what are you doing?
I know.
But she's all starry-eyed. She goes and gets married and immediately regrets it after the wedding night. Laurence Olivier is fantastic in these scenes where he has to stare in disbelief blankly at Isabella while she is talking about how much in love they are. He gives this fantastic, okay, look, and it's perfect, absolutely perfect. But that is a story about this tremendous romance. It changes a lot of the details to highlight the tremendous romance between the two. And it gets rid of the second half of the book entirely. And, oh well, still worth watching, but, telling a different story.
But that's so interesting to think about, like the ways in which, you can tell the story as if it's a, great tumultuous romance. And then there's something else that's going on there too. Like, what is Heathcliff, right? What exactly, where did he come from? Like, how are we supposed to understand him?
Yeah. I will say before I answer that question, I also saw the 1970 version, which has Timothy Dalton as Heathcliff.
Oh, dear.
I don't recommend it.
No. There's a new one coming out, too, I think.
I did see the trailer for that. It looks interesting. The internet is not thrilled with it because it comes off as weird. But honestly, being incredibly weird seems like the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
The question of, what is Heathcliff that is underlying this entire book, I suppose. This book is a weird fable that takes place in a weird place where weird events happen and people are incredibly heightened. And that is, I think, the important thing that's going on here. It is over the top in the way that a fable or, I guess, arguably a landscape like the moors might be.
And also there's this tremendous kind of nature versus nurture or nature and nurture kind of framework that underlies, especially the early life of Heathcliff. You're talking a little bit earlier about how Mr. Earnshaw brings him back. And I remember thinking that was such an incredibly interesting passage. He gets home late from his trip out to Liverpool and he comes back with the little kid. And he says you have to take it as a gift of God, though it says dark almost as if it came from the devil. Right. And then there's this ragged black-haired child and, the whole question of how he's going to fit to the household. And there's a tension, as you were saying earlier, because Cathy's older brother, needless to say, Hindley, he absolutely hates this child, in part because his father favors him so much. Right. And the name he's given Heathcliff is apparently the name of a son who had died in childhood. So there's this weird inside outside kind of thing about Heathcliff. He's in the bosom of the family in the sense that the father really dotes on him. And Cathy, of course, is very tight with him, but he's also completely outside. And so this idea of him maybe being the illegitimate child of Mr. Earnshaw really plays into that, because at the one and same time, he's might be very inside, he might be a half sibling to these children, in which case everything is kind of icky there with him and Cathy.
Yeah. No, the 1970 Timothy Dalton, absolutely, that is canon in that. All the headcanon is in that.
Oh, geez. Or he's completely outside, he's this almost monstrous kind of creature. And, is he monstrous in behavior because that's just his nature? Or is it because of the awful way that Hindley treats him?
Yeah, because it's very easy to read this book, and at least parts of it, and be like, oh, everything Heathcliff is doing is reasonable. Or even if I wouldn't do that, it makes sense that he would hate these people this much because they are awful to him.
Awful.
One of the questions that I always had about this book, which is answered in the text, is what the heck Wuthering is all about? What is that word? I don't know that word.
Yeah, what is that about?
Well, it's in the book. It says, in the first chapter, I believe, Wuthering Heights is the name of Mr. Heathcliff's dwelling. Wuthering being a significant provincial adjective descriptive of the atmospheric tumult to which its station is exposed in stormy weather.
Oh.
So it means being blown about by the winds and having to live in those conditions. So, this book is the height of wuthering. It is characters who are pressed down in all directions by these strong forces and, both outside of them and the ones that they end up creating within themselves, right? Heathcliff is pushed to extremes and ends up being an extreme pushing force in return.
Like it's stormy inside of him, kind of.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's also him having been battered by storms.
And also, the other thing is, were you struck by the passages where you have like regional dialect?
Okay.
Some of which you can read and some which is really, in other words, the reason I mention it is because having Wuthering in the title is presumably like that a term that comes from the provincial lexicon, right?
Yeah. So one of the servants, Joseph, speaks in dialect, in a Yorkshire dialect, which is aggressively represented on the page and does make for some very difficult reading, I found.
Yeah, but also I don't know if you noticed, at least one point, Nellie Dean is talking and she's quoting Joseph. And then when she quotes Joseph, it's written in that same jargony. And I'm like, what is going on?
Well, and also just sort of from a practical level, why don't any of these other people speak in that accent? They are in the West Riding of Yorkshire. They all have an accent.
Is it a class thing?
Maybe. I suppose, I don't know exactly what. I think people have talked about this. Like, what accent did the Brontë sisters have with their Irish father and their Yorkshire surroundings that they barely engaged with? Like, how did they end up speaking? I don't have an answer for that.
And also, why would Nellie Dean not have that accent, right?
Yeah.
She's a maid, right? Presumably, if the class thing is going on there, right?
Yeah. But she was raised alongside of these, of the Earnshaws, right? She thinks of herself as one of them, even though, she talks about how she was raised as one of them, but nobody that she talks about seems to treat her quite like that.
Well, it's inside. She's inside and outside. There's this really revealing moment when she's talking about her childhood and how Mr. Earnshaw was really nice and how, with the going to Liverpool, how he asked all the children if they wanted him to bring something back. And his own children ask him for relatively expensive things, like Kathy wants a whip, very on brand for Kathy, right?
Yep.
And Hindley asks for, I don't know what, something.
A violin. Yeah.
That's it. And Nellie asks for just something small. He brings her fruit or
Apples
something
and
like
pears,
that. Yeah.
yeah.
So it's like she's inside enough to get a gift, but she's not inside enough to have a gift that's on a par with the other gifts.
And also, apples and pears, do they not have them
I don't know.
around? You have to walk 60 miles to get apples? All right, maybe. I don't know. Nellie is really interesting. And it's also really interesting, sort of her position as a housekeeper, as a servant.
Mm.
And the way that connects with how much we trust her, how much we're supposed to trust her. Servants are in an interesting situation in a household where they are sort of both expected to know everything that's going on and also not know anything because they're just a servant.
Mm-hmm.
So that is already a interesting tension to play on, and it feels like the book is leading into that, but it's a little hard to say. How intentional that is.
Yeah, I guess I was very Team Nellie because I find Kathy so incredibly annoying.
Sure. As does Nellie at times.
Oh my God.
Kathy is sick in her bed and acting weird.
Sick,
and Nellie is just
quote unquote sick. What is she doing? It's I'm going to go into a frenzy, and I'm like, calm down. Just calm down.
It's true. But yeah, Nellie has absolutely no time for her in those moments. It's very interesting to track when Nellie has time for certain characters and when she doesn't. And that's, I don't know, I didn't read it carefully enough to trace that, but it's definitely there. And I suppose other people have done it, but still, it's very interesting. I enjoyed Nellie as a character, and especially that creeping sensation that she was not as good a character as she presented herself to be, which is exactly what I said about the narrator of The Door, the Magda Sabo book that we talked about a few months ago. It was interesting to be back on that. It was also interesting to be back on the moors.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't read Hound of the Baskervilles, but I did watch the movie, and I had that moment of thinking, how much moors are there in England? And turns out a certain amount, but these are different moors. That one's not up in Yorkshire, and it has a slightly different character. So I just haven't been to that part of England, so what do I know? Fair enough.
So I have two questions. So what do you think about the frame narrative? Like, why do we need it? And also, what do you think about Kathy? I mean, I've expressed my view of Kathy, I think, but I'm curious about your thoughts.
What do I think of Kathy? I think, I
I don't want to
mean,
get you in trouble with your spouse, but what do you think of it?
oh, I mean, believe me, my husband also thinks these are all awful people.
Oh,
He's not reading them going like, ooh, these two are the most adorable, like, couple goals kind of thing. Nothing like that. Kathy is, Kathy, what do I think of Kathy? I think Kathy is fun when she is in her intense mood, when she is going over the top about how Heathcliff is me. I am Heathcliff. We are the same. There's also a really great moment. So she's sort of sickly, whatever that means, but she's lying in bed and she's being very demanding. And she's talking to Nellie, and something about Heathcliff comes up and she says, if only I were sure it would kill him, she interrupted, I'd kill myself directly. These 3 awful nights I've never closed my lids. And oh, I've been tormented. I've been haunted, Nellie. But I begin to fancy you don't like me.
Oh, God.
And then this line happened. This line happened that she says to Nellie, how strange. I thought, though everybody hated and despised each other, they could not avoid loving me.
God. Oh, God.
What an amazing line. And if that line isn't supposed to be funny, I don't understand what's happening in this novel.
Oh my God.
So yeah, she's absolutely irritating, but that's funny. That's funny being like, no, I who've been like so bitter and cruel to people, and like, I know everybody loves me, Kathy.
Oh God.
I'm the main character of this story.
Well, that is it. That is it. She does understand that she's the main character.
She does believe that she's a main character. In terms of the structure of the novel, it is kind of interesting how it is, again, like Frankenstein, where it's like tales within tales within tales, where you're several layers deep.
I was just thinking about that. Yeah. Structurally, it's quite similar in certain ways.
Yeah. And for me, reading it, it feels like it is all about encouraging you to start doubting the reality of the situation, right? Because it is second, third, fourth hand knowledge sometimes that you're encountering, that level of distance starts to make you pay more attention to where the information is coming from, what the agenda of the person saying it is, and all that. Like, to a certain extent, it's just the fashion of the time, right? These nested narrative novels were not uncommon.
Yeah.
But, like, it does feel like it's serving a useful function here.
So have you talked about it with your husband?
I have. He was very excited to check in on me, every few chapters and hear my headcanons. And, I'd ask him questions, but I didn't want any spoilers and so forth.
Mm.
And he was very glad that I liked it and that I had a lot of fun with it. And he watched the movie, which he'd never seen, the 1930s movie. So we watched it together and we both admired Olivier's performance and were giggling about some of the changes that they made and be like, that's not how this book goes. But it is how the movie goes, and that's fine. The adaptations can't be coterminous with the novel. They can't do the same thing. They're going to do their own thing. It is just interesting when what a movie puts out into the world seems to change how we view these kinds of novels, right?
Mm-hmm.
I feel like a lot of the discourse around, I mentioned Hamlet earlier, like I feel like a lot of the discourse around Hamlet comes from the Olivier version of Hamlet, and I feel like a lot of discussion around Wuthering Heights comes from the Olivier Wuthering Heights.
Mm-hmm.
What has he done?
Yeah, that's interesting to think about, like how much it has to do with, I don't know if you want to call it certain, I hesitate to call it ideals of masculinity, like certain types or frameworks for understanding male characters, right? I'm wondering, like, to what extent there's like something going on in the mid 20th century that's kind of reworking and reinterpreting those characters in a way that will be really impactful.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it's an interesting question. I did have the feeling when I was watching the 1930s movie that, like, this is how this story is going to be told in the 1930s. And I'm super curious when this new version comes out next year, if it's going to just read as a failed experiment like I find the 1970 one to be, although that is very 1970, or if it's going to feel like the interesting version of the story that could only be told in the 2020s.
Do you know if they're doing the second half of the novel? Like, do you know if the story goes all the way?
Signs point to no, but I don't know anything. No.
Oh, we will see.
I'll be interested if you ever go back to it after we've had this discussion and I've told you how funny the book is, if that'll help you read it again.
Yeah, no, that's actually very helpful because having permission to chuckle is actually really helpful because when you get aggravated, you could be like, this person is ridiculous, and not rather than angry,
The classic book for that for me is Waiting for Godot, where like people read the play or I think if you see the play, you get the idea. But if you just read the play, it comes off as very like serious and so forth. And it's like, no, there's a reason that you pick Robin Williams or Steve Martin to play these roles. Like this is a funny play. But a lot of people pick up a book of great literature and assume it's not going to be funny.
Yeah, important means serious. And that's not true.
It's so not true.
Don't give the baby any birthday cake, said the mother of the 10-month-old baby. It's too spicy. It will make him cry. It's my birthday, I said. Can't he have a taste? Just icing, said his mother. The icing was a huge success. Oh, give him a little cake, said his father. No, said his mother. It will make him scream. I gave the baby a little piece of icing with cake attached. He began to laugh and pound his fist, which means more. The babies all ate ginger cake. The 3-year-olds ate cake and then attempted to pick off all the icing. The older children ate cake and cheese buns, and then everyone helped clean up. By the time the last dish had been put in the dishwasher, the 3-year-olds had been fed their suppers and given their baths. One was asleep in her bed, and the other was in a taxi on the way to her bed. Every crumb had been eaten, the table had been wiped.
Well, now I want ginger cake.
I know, it's so good. Had you ever read any of Laurie Colwin's work?
I had not until you said you wanted to read this for this recording, and I popped into Home Cooking and read a few of the essays within, and it was very nice. I enjoyed it.
Oh, good. Do you remember which ones you saw? Or do any stand out?
I remember the one about the eggplant, and I remember the one about the terrible, terrible dinners. Repulsive. Repulsive is the word she uses.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, she's a good storyteller. And actually, the reason I went back to Laurie Colwin is we had a conversation at one point some time ago about neglected books, like, authors that had been kind of had some visibility and then kind of receded into the background. And her book, Home Cooking, came to mind because it's a book that I read in the late 80s and I really loved it. I mean, it wasn't an important canonical book, but really enjoyed it. And her work had gotten a certain amount of attention, both her novels and her food writing. But then I think, as far as I can tell, I don't know if she's been forgotten, but not remembered in the same way, maybe. And so I thought, neat to go back to that book, to kind of bring her back to the surface, but also to indulge my own memory of what it was like to read that book back in the late 80s.
Wonderful. Well, did it hold up?
Yeah. Of course, the first time you read something, there's a certain charmingness and freshness to it. But then I still got a lot of pleasure out of this book. Maybe I should say just a little bit about her, and then also a little bit about how I first stumbled onto her writing, because that was a kind of a very particular moment. She was born in 1944, died in 1992, so was in her 40s when she passed away. So someone whose life was cut a bit short. And the author of 5 novels. And the one that, I don't know if this is the most famous one, but the one that I had read is Happy All the Time, which came out in the late 70s. And then she had these 2 books of food writing and also some volumes of short stories. And she tended to write a lot in magazines, and that's how I encountered her work for the first time. There was this news magazine in New York, which was one of those ones where they would sort of give it away in the local stores, right? So you just pick it up. In the late 80s, I think it ran from 1988 to 1990. So it had a very short life called 7 Days. And she had a column in there. And I ran across one of her pieces in there. It became the chapter How to Give a Party, which is in her book Home Cooking, which we're looking at today. But back in 7 Days, because I found my old torn out piece of it. So this is from the late 80s.
Oh.
Yeah, I know, it's not funny. I kind of hung on to it like a little relic. And there it's called The Tea Party, Birthdays, and Other Sticky Situations. And that's where the quotation comes from.
Yeah, I mean, it does read sort of with that kind of breezy voice. Breezy, thoughtful, but like going from subject to subject that I associate with magazine
voice. Yeah. I find it really charming because, I'm thinking back to when we did, we did a cluster of books on food writing. I find myself thinking about how does this fit into food writing, like a genre of writing that we talked about and saw so many different kind of instantiations of, right? And I think the thing she does that's so neat is she combines like sort of very factual information, like practical advice, how many knives you need in your kitchen, like the simple stuff with this kind of, like you said, breezy style, this personal quality. She'll give you one of her mother's recipes. She'll sort of tell a story and then she'll give a recipe and then she'll have some ironic commentary, like it's very chatty kind of, and pleasurable in the way that chatting with someone can be.
I kept thinking, this is podcasty.
Yeah, I guess it is.
It feels like that's not a bad thing, obviously, but it felt very conversational in that way. So much so that when I realized that there was an audiobook of it, which obviously she doesn't read it, someone else does. But nevertheless, I was like, oh, I'll grab the audiobook and that'll be really just lovely putting on, listening to while I'm doing stuff kind of thing for someday in the future. So I think it's really nice for that. But, there's a sense in like the ways that we're describing it that it feels like we're all I guess because we're pairing it with, Wuthering Heights, like one of the foundational novels of the English literary canon, that it's like, she's very pleasant and chatty. Like, as I was reading her, I was thinking a bit about MFK Fisher, who we talked about a while back, and who also was writing these sort of essays that were a mix of sort of her own situation and also sort of advice for the kitchen, right? Recipes would show up, but also anecdotes. And I was thinking about how one of the reasons why MFK Fisher now reads so vitally, especially the book that we looked at, was because it was written during and sort of about the conditions of deprivation during the war.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a certain distance that we have from that, which inherently makes the material more interesting,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I'm wondering if you think that there's any difference between reading these essays in the 80s, when everything she's talking about is sort of like, yeah, that's how the world is, to now, when it's like, that's how the world used to be, and I remember it to be like that. But things are different now.
Yeah, no, there's definitely that then and now quality to it. But the aspect of the book that sort of stands out in my mind, that stood out in my mind then, back in the late 80s when I was reading, and also stands out now, is the ways in which children show up in the book.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And it's striking because the book is reflecting what it's like to be living in the city, and to live under the certain conditions that you live with when you're in the city. Like you might have, she has this one lovely passage where she talks about this apartment she used to have. She talks about cooking in different spaces and how you can manage cooking in quite small spaces. And so in this one, I'm going to read a little bit of this passage. It is the eggplant one. So you read this.
Yeah.
She says, a very small room, 7 by 20. I had enough space for a twin-sized bed, a very small night table, and a desk. This desk, which I use to this day, was meant for a child of, say, 11. At the foot of my bed was a low table that would have been a coffee table in a normal apartment. In mine, it served as a lampstand, and beneath it was a basket containing my sheets and towels. Instead of a kitchen, this minute apartment featured a metal counter. Underneath was a refrigerator the size of a child's playhouse. On top was what I called the stove, but was really only 2 electric burners. In short, a hot plate. Many people found this place charming, at least for 5 minutes or so. Many thought I must be insane to live in so small a place, but I loved my apartment and found it the coziest place on earth. So it's like weird, right? Because it's like on the one hand, she's remembering the logistical challenges of living in this small place and describes exactly how you manage the cooking. But it's also like this weird, like dollhouse memory even for her, right?
Yeah. It's interesting because when I read that on my own, I was thinking about it in terms of like, oh, I remember when I lived in a place like that, when I first moved to Toronto for grad school and had just a hot plate and a tiny mini fridge and all that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But, you brought up the child thing and I paid more attention to that. And it's like, oh, yeah, no, this is definitely like, there's a sense of both sort of reflecting a kind of immaturity in where she is in life, that like, this is a thing that she, is now older and has more of a financial soundness and isn't living in a tiny apartment anymore.
Yeah, she's making dinner parties for more people. She's worried about having too much salt in her diet, like all the grown-up stuff, right?
Yeah. But it's also like this like fantasy play area where it's like she can think of everything in terms of like, oh, and I had my little, doll's house child-size play fridge, which here are all those strange games I played in my childish stage of cooking, including all of the weird stuff she does with her eggplants, right? And it leads to like a meditation on like the cooking we do when we're alone that is shameful and embarrassing and nobody else wants to know about that stuff.
And yeah, and so there's this like kind of, she's having her own nostalgia for like the single life and how you manage, but then she's also describing what it's like to manage in the city with small children, but in a way that kind of reproduces, if I call it this, the culture of childhood. So, for example, in the cold open that I read, I noticed it, like actually when I was reading it earlier, how similar the syntax is to the syntax you find in certain children's books. Right? It's like kind of repetitive. One was asleep in her bed and the other was in a taxi on the way to her bed. Right? And this like enumeration, what the babies did, what the 3-year-olds did, what the older children did, what the 3-year-olds, you know what I mean? It's like got this formulaic quality that echoes, like you don't even think about it, right? But it echoes what it's like to be reading books to children. And she does something, there's another passage, this is in her chapter, How to Make Gingerbread. She describes she gives a whole bunch of different recipes, but then toward the end she says, recently my daughter came into a set of child-sized baking things, a roaster big enough for a pair, a tiny double boiler, a finger-sized egg beater plus 2 little muffin tins, and 3 saucer-sized cake pans. One afternoon I decided to bake the gingerbread in these pans. The muffins came out the size of coat buttons, and the cakes were 6 inches in diameter. As I looked at those little cakes, I realized that I had stumbled into something big. And she makes like little 3-layer child cakes. And then she says later, this little 3-layer cake will feed 6 delicate, well-mannered people with small appetites who are on diets and have just had a large meal, or 4 fairly well-mannered people who are not terribly hungry. 2 absolute pigs can devour it in one sitting. She goes on. But this idea of like this like toys, these are toys she's cooking with. Right? It reminds me of that passage. There's a chapter in Louisa May Alcott's Little Women. I remember we talked about it, called Patty Pans. It's, I mean, it may not be in Little Women. Actually, it's not in Little Women. It's in Little Men. And I can't remember if we talked about it there or if I just told you about it privately because it's like one of my favorite passages. But it also describes this kind of child's cookery. And on the one hand, it's play, but on the other hand, it's meant to bring these little girls into the domestic responsibilities that they will have as women. You know, and so this play between childhood and adulthood seems to me like not to make the book too heavy, but there's this weird stuff going on with childhood and adulthood throughout this book, and it shows up in the oddest places.
But I think there's also, like, just from that passage you read, yes, the responsibilities of adulthood, of cooking, but also like in that moment of cooking or eating, you can engage in a more childlike gobble, gobble, gobble kind of thing, or let's throw this together, right? Like 2 absolute pigs could devour this. There's a childish glee in grabbing that this returns you to.
Yeah. No, it's very playful. Yeah.
That's really interesting. I mean, especially with the title, right? Home cooking, that it's focusing on all these different aspects of home, both as the place where you can do the embarrassing stuff that other people don't want to know about, and make the nasty food that you really like, but also where the children are and where some of these meals are happening together.
Mm-hmm. And there's like this playful quality. Another one that I really like, and this is an example of a number of the chapters that are almost like meditations on one particular thing. This one I'm going to mention is called fish. There's another one that's just called like tomatoes. They're like, and I have to say, I mean, it's not the same as Gertrude Stein, but it's a little bit like that. You know what I mean? It's like, this chapter is about tomatoes, and it's just like funny stories and like a recipe or two. And anyway, I really like that. So in this chapter on fish, she's talking about different varieties of fish, right? And she says, as an entertainment after a morning at playgroup, the local mothers would wheel their babies into the fish store and amuse them by picking up the smaller fish and displaying them. Then we bought our fillets and went off to cook our lunches. The fishmen were extremely cheerful and forbearing about this. One morning, one of my friends took her 2.5-year-old daughter to the fish store. The fish man, an unshaven, unsmiling person, turned to the child. What do you want? He barked. Slamber, she said without batting an eye. What color is it? Pink and green, said the child. Oh, yeah? He said. Well, we don't carry it. Then give me something else, said the little girl. We eat quite a lot of slamber these days, which turned out to be salmon. And I remember my daughter's first taste of it. And she goes on. And so it's like these neat little like vignettes that are nostalgic even when they're in the present tense. So, and I think this like childhood aspect is like a big part of that, because like that's what it's like being with children, right? Because you're always aware that you're in this present moment and you're so aware that it's a transitory moment, because they're constantly changing.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And so like the book, even though it's just like it's just home cooking, it's just these, I think that the time quality, I think that's what captivated me way back in the 80s when I was reading it. And like I'm reading it now, I'm like, yeah, I can see it working.
It's interesting that you talked about like the fish and tomato chapters being about fish and about tomatoes. I found that in the chapters that I read, that there, was a nominal theme to them. But especially in that eggplant chapter that we've discussed, which is not all about eggplant, but it is for a few pages. It's very Montaigne-like in the sense that it starts, it's driving out of the garage and it's going to a place, but it's going to make a few stops along the way. And it might not even like the destination it's going to might not be where the drive ends,
Uh-huh. No, you're absolutely right.
So are these fish and tomato chapters like that as well, where it's like we're talking about fish, but we're gonna make a lot of stops along the way as we get through our fish.
Yeah, no, the fish chapter is exactly doing that, and the tomato chapter actually I think is in. There was a second book called More Home Cooking. A writer returns to the kitchen, and like it's kind of a mixed bag because, as I mentioned, she died suddenly in 1992, and so this book came out posthumously, made up of things she had published elsewhere that family and friends worked to kind of bring to publication. So it's like it doesn't have the same kind of underlying continuity that you get when a writer actually puts together their own stuff. So it's lacking that. But the tomatoes chapter in there is kind of charming. And it is very Montaigne life. It starts out, there are very few things mankind cannot live without. For centuries, we survived without compact discs, automated bank tellers, iceberg lettuce, and bubblegum flavored toothpaste, to say nothing of the internal combustion engine. But life as we know it would be unimaginable without the tomato.
What?
I know.
All right.
It's very,
I mean, I agree. I really like tomatoes, but I also can imagine, I guess maybe I've been forced to imagine sort of pre-contact Europe and all that where there were no tomatoes.
I know. But then like she talks about like just the summers, pulling ripe tomatoes off the vine and biting in. In summer, the idea is to eat as many tomatoes as you can and enjoy the luxury of getting sick of them. She tells about her favorite salad, what kind of salad you can make in the winter, a particular recipe for this nice tomato pie. And then this. The other tomato concoction, she's said she's going to talk about two things. The other tomato concoction has no name. I had it at a very fancy buffet as a side dish or condiment. Whatever it was, I tried not to disgrace myself by eating enormous quantities of it, but I was not successful. I could not get enough. Finally, I snagged a waiter and begged him to tell me what it was. And then she goes on to describe what he told her. And then she starts telling us about a book that her daughter had called Little Dog Dreaming, about a city dog that goes to the country for the summer and dreams about the exact spot in which he's buried his bone. And she says, I spend my winter daydreaming about the exact bowl I'm going to make my first summer tomato salad in. Right? It is very like wandering, right? And yet it's always wandering around this one point, which in this particular case is the tomato.
Right. Well, it sounds like a thoroughly lovely book.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, that's the More Home Cooking. If you read one, the one to read is Home Cooking, and it is really charming.
And I feel like I want to, we've already talked a little bit about this, but I want to sort of underline, like, I guess I'm thinking about these kinds of books, these very pleasant, maybe not groundbreaking, maybe not, shaking the world up kind of books, but like
it's a friendly book.
It's a friendly book, but also like it's an important part of your literary diet, I would argue. You can't just read Wuthering Heights all the time.
No, you could put it by your bed and read a little bit of it, or leave it, I don't know, somewhere in your living room, right? You pick it up, right?
You were going to say bathroom.
I mean? Like,
you were going to say bathroom right there.
Well, it's not really. The chapters are a little too long for bathroom reading. So I considered it, but it's not demanding. Like it's like really pleasant. Like it's like it's easy, in a really nice way.
And I mean, now that we live in a sort of fairly post-magazine world.
Yeah, no, it gives you that back. I think that's exactly right, actually, because it's harder to find that kind of, just that perfect like length of thing to read.
Well, that was a lovely pairing of books. I don't know if we found as many similarities between them as we often do, but I think they contrasted nicely.
And also for me, children. Like I was so, maybe it's on my mind, right? But in both of those books, I was thinking all the time about the children in these books, right? These like wild, chaotic teenagers, and then that poor, pathetic child Hareton, right? That kind of stuff. And also like the young Heathcliff, like what was happening to the children in the book, right? Was really like, I was noticing that. And like I said, at home cooking, that aspect of it seems to me really important.
Yeah. Well, what else have you been reading, or what else have you been up to?
Well, I can tell you because, so probably one of the reasons I'm so noticing the children is because my oldest daughter had a baby a few weeks ago. Yay! And his name is Dashiell. And so in honor of his birth, I read Dashiell Hammett's The Thin Man.
Oh, yes. How was that?
Which is really good. It's absolutely terrific.
I mean, it sounds like the book you'd like.
Well, no, I mean, I'd always thought, oh, I should read those because I do like that kind of genre stuff, but I just never got around to it. And then there was a copy of it laying around in my daughter's place, and so I picked it up, and it's absolutely excellent. Have you ever read any of Hammett's stuff?
I don't think I have, no.
It's surprisingly good because it's like the whole genre, just like, Nick and Nora Charles, drinking like incredible amounts of booze. Like the amount of booze people drink in this book is insane. I mean, even with Prohibition, I'm just like, anyway. And then the mystery is pretty satisfying, but it also has this really creepy underlying content warning, like incest kind of subplot that's not explicit, but is kind of implicit, and it never gets explained.
Right.
And I thought, well, that's weird. I wonder if people think about that or talk about that. I'm sort of curious. Anyway, so I'm really eager to read some more of Dashiell Hammett's novels now. My son bought me a copy of The Maltese Falcon a couple days ago. I haven't read it yet, but if it's good, I will report.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
The other thing that I've been really preoccupied with, having just gotten back from helping out with the baby for a few weeks, is the annual Muncie Language and History Symposium that we do down in Princeton. This is the 5th annual one. And basically, this is a gathering of Lenape people, like the land I live on is Lenape territory, right? So it's an opportunity to get together and work on language revitalization and reclamation, historical work, working with museums and so on. But one thing we're doing at this year, which is a little different from past years, is there's a discussion session on Lenape books, and not old books like you'd find in archives or libraries or museums, though we've done that in other years, but current books that people are publishing. And so as part of that, a couple of the presenters are going to talk about books that were published by members of their family earlier in the 20th century, and which they might want to republish if they can get the copyright sorted out. Either just reprint as is, or maybe even reprint them in a way that is kind of a little bit contextualized or has a little bit of framework or commentary to it. So I'm really interested to see how that conversation develops, because I think that's such an interesting thing, when older texts are kind of made new or reanimated. I think this is a really neat opportunity.
Yeah, no, that sounds really remarkable.
Yeah.
It's exciting.
Yeah, I'll share more as that develops.
I have been chipping away at my project to read the books by people who I know, which I haven't been doing as diligently as I could, but I'm making some way in it. And 2 of the books that I read recently were interestingly related. I guess it's not too surprising that people I know have a connection to Toronto sometimes. But I read David Demchuk's horror novel, Red X, and a nonfiction book by Maggie Helwig called Encampment, Resistance, Grace, and an Unhoused Community.
Oh, I'd like to hear about that.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because they both have a point of contact, other than, I guess, me. But they both have a point of contact in that... So Red X is it's fiction. It's a horror fiction, but it's sort of dipping in from the 1980s to recently. Sort of every 8 years, it dips into the world again and talks about some gay man who goes missing. And of course, the sort of horror comes from the force that is pulling them away, which is a force that's like some people describe Heathcliff, this sort of otherworldly force that is maniacally evil or something, but has its own logic to it. It's very interesting and compelling that way, but it's also inspired by, you might remember, and some of our listeners will know, that a few years ago there was a sort of notorious serial killer that was targeting gay men who wouldn't be missed, let's say, because they were coming from minority communities, because they were probably immigrants, because they probably didn't have a really strong network, because they were gay and therefore might have lost some of that network. Like, there was a sense that they were sort of easy prey for somebody who was trying to do that. And also because the Toronto Police Department refused to admit that any of this was happening and just let it malinger for far longer until community people really started doing a lot of the work for them, let's say. So that was a really interesting engagement with that. I quite enjoyed it, even though it's scary, and I'm not usually good at scary stuff, but this was fine. Maggie Helwig's book. Maggie is a poet and writer who a few years ago became an Anglican priest. And she is in charge of St. Stephen in the Fields, which is a church down in Kensington Market, if you remember, I don't know, on College Street. It's the church that's right there. Yeah. Her church ended up having an encampment, like unhoused people who were setting up tents and so forth, on a patch of land just outside it, which there is some debate as to whether it is sort of church property or city property, but that's not really the issue here. She's just sort of trying to, I don't know, do right by the people in the encampment, trying to be open-hearted, trying to treat them as people, while some forces in the city are trying to, our former mayor in particular, had a real desire to get them, I don't know, gone? Like, what does that mean? But did some really terrible and cruel things to the encampments involving cranes and things that just went in and crushed people's meager belongings. And she does a really good job of humanizing them and sort of talking about all the different difficulties that these people encounter from their situation, which, the city pretends that they are providing enough resources to deal with, but they're simply not.
Well, do you get a sense that what kind of impact the book's had in terms of like awakening people to what's going on there?
The book literally just came out like last month, I think.
Oh, okay.
So it was fresh. I saw it as I was walking by my local bookstore, and I was like, oh, I'll need to grab that. So it popped right up to the front of the pile. The situation at her church got a bit of news when it happened a few years ago, and eventually the city did move in and basically destroyed the encampment. There are still a few people who sleep outside the church, I believe, but it's not an encampment like it was. And it's very frustrating, but like politicians are going to do terrible things sometimes, And it's also just interesting that it also touched upon that whole serial killer situation, because one of the people who was a victim of the serial killer was somebody who was known in the area. And like Maggie knew the guy, and it's somebody who, quote unquote, wouldn't be missed, but there were people in that area who did know him and miss him. And it's a really lovely book of thinking about how we treat people in those situations. So,
no, I'd like to read that.
Yeah, I recommend it. I think you'd enjoy it. One of the things that I'm going to be doing in the near future is I am in a few weeks going to be heading out to Portland, Oregon, where I'm going to be one of the readers at the Portland Poetry Confluence.
Oh, awesome.
It's a very big thing that a bunch of different poetry groups in the area are getting together, and it's being organized by the poetry reading series that I helped found 20-something years ago.
Oh, that's so cool.
It's sort of the biggest thing that they have organized, and I am very excited to have been asked to be part of it, and a whole bunch of other cool people are going to be there. And while I feel a bit of, anxiety crossing that national border these days, nevertheless, I'm not going to let them stop me from seeing my beloved friends and family, and I'm not going to miss out on this wonderful occasion if I can. So
yeah, no, definitely. Have you chosen what you'll read? Or
no, I have no idea. It's coming. I really got to figure this one out because but no, I haven't decided yet. That's okay.
It'll be great.
I've done this before.
No, it's going to be great. I'm so glad you're going to do that.
I'm super looking forward to it. Listeners, if you happen to be in the Portland area, come on by, say hi to me. We'll have a link in the show notes for the website for it, portlandpoetryconfluence.org. It'll be good. It'll be lots of fun.
Great.
Well, are there any books that you're excited to read? Maybe even talk about next time?
Well, I think, if I remember correctly, we were giving some thought to October being a good month to both come back to Jane Austen.
Yeah, we have not done a Jane Austen in a while, and it is her 250th.
Mm-hmm.
And while I believe her birthday is in December, I think we're going to celebrate a little early, and possibly each of us might be picking a Jane Austen next time. So that's going to be exciting.
Now, we did Emma before, if I remember correctly.
we did Emma before, so that leaves a few more still on the table, right? She has 6 main ones and a few other little ones.
Mm-hmm. So which one are you doing?
Well, I think your plan was to do Pride and Prejudice, right?
I don't have to, but that one would be really interesting to go back to. It's a book I read fairly early on in life and have gone back to a number of times. I used to teach it years ago too, so it's actually kind of interesting to read it fresh because I haven't read it in several years now.
I mean, I did start rereading it, and it is as much of a delight as I remembered, and we'll talk about this, but it's so funny. Again, it's a very funny book.
Oh, it's very funny.
Very funny, in a very different way from how Wuthering Heights struck me as funny. It is much more upfront about it. And I'm going to probably be returning to a book of hers that I quite love also because I find it quite funny, Northanger Abbey.
I'm actually really looking forward to that because while I'd read at an earlier stage in life all of Austen's novels, I found Northanger Abbey actually quite difficult because, I mean, of course, it's like a satire, right? Like it's a genre thing. She's kind of, not a satire exactly, but a genre thing she's doing, right? And I think when I tried to read it years ago, I wasn't really equipped to try to think that through. So it'll be neat talking about it with you when we come back.
I am curious to see what it'll be like rereading that after having read Wuthering Heights, which I imagine does a better job of being that incredibly heightened, oh no! But the whole thing in Northanger Abbey is that there's nothing to be afraid of. Whereas in Wuthering Heights, things
are terrible.
Are bad.
Things are
quite bad. All right, well, I'm looking forward to that. But in the meanwhile, if you, listener, would like to get in touch with us, you can always email us at spouter@megaphonic.fm, and we would love to hear from you. And this show is made possible by people like you supporting us on Patreon. And patrons get to hang out with us in a friendly Discord. Find out more at patreon.com/megaphonic. Show notes with links for anything we've mentioned in this episode are at megaphonic.fm/spouter/85. And the Spouter-Inn is one of the fancy little podcasts over at Megaphonic FM. So, until next time,
see you again at the Spouter-Inn.